Hello and welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B and of course I'm joined by Rob D and this is episode 305. Now 2019's a write-off, right? Brexit, doom and gloom, let's go back to bed. No, there are hotspots and hotspots you absolutely need on your radar. We've got Manchester, of course, that makes a list. We've got the new Manchester, wonder what that is. And we've got some other sizzlers that you need to be paying attention to.
Yes, thank you for joining us on the Property Podcast, where every single Thursday property investors come together to be informed and inspired. If you're looking to increase your portfolio in 2019, then pay attention to today's episode because we're going to be sharing where we are going to be investing this year. We've also got a tease for some very exciting news that's coming up, and stick around to the end where we've got a handy tool for you as well. So our news this week is one that you found, Rob, and it's really interesting because it's based on something that I had absolutely no idea about.
Yeah, neither did I, Rob. That's why I'm bringing it to the podcast, because I think it's fascinating. It's not so much a news story, but a really interesting article that's been put together recently. The article's been put together by Who Owns England, and you can go to whoownsengland.org to find this, or go to our show notes this week, which you can find at thepropertyhub.net/2019 hotspots. Now, Who Owns England kind of gives away what they do, but what they've done here in this particular article is look at Who Owns England and have found that 15% of freehold land in England and Wales is unregistered. This means that you can't go to land registry and find out who owns it. 15%, that is huge. This was a learning point for me. I'd made the assumption that all land was registered on the land registry, but turns out I'm incorrect. Now, they're trying to change that, and the land registry have a goal of getting every piece of land registered by 2030. But currently, today, 15% is unregistered, and they've got a really cool map that you can look at to show you where that land is, and some of it is pretty sizable. It's incredible. Now, it's not that people don't own this land. It's possible that a very small percentage is unowned, but it's actually the way it's been registered and the way some people have probably hidden ownership, and this is particularly through old families or institutions. Now, beyond this being interesting, it actually has an impact as well, which the article covers. And it talks about how it is detrimental to the UK property market because it slows down planning. When there's big infrastructure decisions needing to be made, then they need to find out who owns this land. Think HS2, for example. It's a pretty big infrastructure project, but you need to build a rail line through lots of land. If you can't find easily who owns that land, it's going to slow things down. And secondly, just general conveyancing. If you are close or near to land that is unowned, depending on what you're doing, that may slow down that process as well. It's a fascinating website and highly recommend it for you to go through the website. But if you're just going to read one article, read this one and look at the map. It's really interesting. It certainly stopped me in my tracks and took 20 minutes of my attention. So give it a read, have a look at the map, and if you're really interested, dig through the website.
So in just a moment, we're going to be talking about where we will be investing in 2019. But investing is just part of our plans. Rob, we've got something big coming up this year. And excitingly, we're only a couple of weeks away from finally being able to reveal what it is.
Yeah, so if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you may have heard us just drop into conversation that we've been working on some big projects. And when I say big projects, it's the biggest project we've ever worked on. We've been working on this for over 12 months. The idea has been bubbling away for a lot longer. Last year, a tremendous amount of effort has gone into making this a reality. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be able to tell you what that reality is, what Rob and I have done, and most importantly, how it's going to benefit you and hopefully change your lives. Now, this is one that you will not want to miss. 2 weeks' time, make sure you don't miss the podcast because you will not want to miss what we're going to reveal.
So it's January. Hopefully you've been working on your goals and your plans for 2019 over Christmas. And part of those plans, for most of us, I'm sure, will involve buying property. That naturally leads on to the question, well, where? We've talked multiple times on the podcast before about how if you can invest locally, then great, it makes it a lot easier. But it's exceptionally unlikely that your local area is going to be the best place in the whole country to invest. So if you are open to going a little bit further afield, where should you be going? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. We're going to run you through the areas that we are personally going to be investing in, the areas that RMP is going to be sourcing in for clients, and the areas that we're looking to acquire land in for development projects. So these are some pretty meaty undertakings. So we've put a lot of thought into this list. But rather than keeping it secret and hoarding it away and just having it for our own benefit, we thought we'd share it with you today.
Of course we will. So let's get into our list. Now, this is in no particular order. We've got 6 hotspots for you, or 6 in a bit, and you'll understand why in a moment. And we, as Rob has already said, are super bullish on them all. If we could do a deal in any of these areas, that's right, we will do it. So number 1 isn't our number 1 in terms of ranking. They are all relatively equal to us. So, what have we got? First up is Greater Manchester. Now, Manchester has been a huge success story. And actually, it's been a huge success story for ourselves as well, because we got into Manchester early. We told you to get into Manchester early. And actually, that built our reputation quite a bit in the marketplace, because we were one of the first people to champion Manchester as an investment area. But Manchester isn't just its city centre. Greater Manchester, the region, is now where some of your attention should be going. Think London. For those of you in the southeast and the property market there, you had central London did really well, and then it rippled out into zone 2, 3, 4 and so on. Exactly the same is going to happen with Greater Manchester, and could be argued that in certain areas is already happening. The amount of regeneration going into Greater Manchester is phenomenal. Just look at Manchester Airport, for example, and the surrounding areas there. Billions of pounds are being spent to regen that area. The tram network is being extended, and there's talks of more happening. Manchester is up live right now. It's a buzzing city. And to top it off, Property Hub has just opened an office there in the city centre. So we're based in London now and Manchester. We see it as a really important city, and so should you. But that Greater Manchester is our pick. But we've kind of got a 1+1 here as well, because Manchester city centre, Rob, should absolutely be on every investor's radar still. And for people who are nervous, it's probably the safest bet for them.
It is. Just because the success of the city centre is rippling out doesn't mean that there are no opportunities in the city centre. Far from it. The transformation over the last few years has been absolutely enormous. If you haven't been there, I think you'd be shocked. It's really hard to overstate what's been happening. Of course, that means that prices have risen. Of course, that means there have been new developments. It means that more and more investors have been moving into the city. You might think that that means the opportunity is over. You might even think that there's too much being built there. If you go to Manchester and you look up, you'll see cranes absolutely everywhere. So you might think it's gone too far. But actually, there was a really interesting programme on Radio 4 about this a while ago that seemed to go into it assuming that there would be, and that there was a story about how there was overbuilding going on. But everyone they spoke to said, no, this is needed. There's not much stock. There's so much demand. There hasn't been enough building for years. And now there are so many people who want to live in the city centre that this stock is needed. And that's a huge transformation. People want to live in the centre of Manchester. That's a recent phenomenon, but it's a very powerful one.
And this was echoed by the legend in property, Tom Bloxham. He, for those who may have missed that episode, go back if you did, because it was a cracker, founded Urban Splash. And his company has transformed many city centres. But one of his predictions, and kind of really was a game changer for me and how I view property markets around England, is that city centres in England are kind of weird and random compared to most other cities around the world. London, the most expensive stock, is in the city centre. And that's the case for most cities. But cities in the rest of our country don't have that phenomenon. What you actually find is prices are higher outside the city and you get better value in the city. But I think Manchester and Birmingham, which we may or may not mention later on, are going to be the first cities to change that. And as Rob said, more and more people are wanting to live in these cities now because they are vibrant, they're buzzing, they're incredible places to be. You can feel their energy. And I will not be shocked that if in 10 years' time, the most expensive place to live in Manchester and Birmingham are the city centres.
Seems very likely. Now, of course, there will be schemes where the demand isn't there, that haven't been thought through, that are overpriced. You've always got to be careful. You can't just pile in and buy anything, but there are certainly big opportunities there, as there are in the next city on our list, Rob, which is Liverpool. Liverpool is another story of city centre regeneration. Rob, I'm sure you'll be able to speak a bit about how much it's transformed, but it truly is a transformation. It's such a great place to be now, and schemes like Liverpool One and the whole of the waterfront have just made it such a fantastic place to live. That's not reflected, though, in the prices. Prices in lots of areas haven't recovered their 2008 levels yet. That means that you can buy in at a lower price that you could have done over a decade ago, despite everything that's improved in terms of the regeneration and employment and everything else that's going on. That also means that yields are strong in Liverpool, because capital values haven't recovered yet, and yet rents have been doing really well because it's an area that so many people want to live. So many people are moving into Liverpool as a whole, but the city centre again in particular.
Yeah, the success story of Liverpool, and yes, I know I'm biased, is incredible. And it's a wonderful place. It always has been a wonderful place because of the people. Yes, again, I am biased. But now the city really does the people justice. It's an incredible place. But to touch on Rob's point on prices and the yields, prices are pretty much what they were in 2008. So they've crashed and only just got back to 2008 prices. But you have to remember, that was 11 years ago. When you factor in inflation, prices are lower than 2008 still. So there's a real opportunity. Liverpool has benefited from the Manchester ripple effect. It's also benefited by being one of the most famous cities outside of London. Manchester's done great because it's got the international airport. It's a huge city. It's buzzing. But Liverpool has also done well because it's got that international reputation. But the development that's been going on in the city is nowhere near enough. There are projects going on, but very little's completed yet, so there's still real opportunity. So Liverpool absolutely should be on your list. Now, next on our list is a city that should have done as well as Liverpool in our eyes, but possibly because of the lack of international fame, it hasn't yet. But I use the word yet because we are bullish on Leeds.
Yeah, it seems like Leeds has been missed a little bit when investors, and especially international investors, have gone looking for greater value because of London being so expensive. They've gone to Manchester and they've gone to Liverpool, but they haven't really gone to Leeds, and that goes for individual investors and institutions as well. As a result, prices in Leeds haven't picked up anywhere near as much. It's also due to a little bit of a myth, because around 2006-2007, there was a real construction boom in Leeds. There were big new blocks of flats going up everywhere. Thousands of new apartments came to completion around 2008. Not great timing, as it turned out, because the economy collapsed. The demand that people thought would be there wasn't, and therefore prices collapsed too. That's given rise to the general impression that there's an oversupply of accommodation in Leeds. And at one point, there absolutely was. But because that impression's been there, very little has been built over the last decade. And while not much has been built, the population has grown extremely quickly. In fact, the population has grown faster than any city in the UK other than Manchester. So that oversupply that was there has been worked through. Prices, as a result, have come back quite significantly since the trough because some developments were hit extremely hard there. But that oversupply has gradually turned into an undersupply. And finally, Rob, it seems like developers are just starting to catch on to this fact.
They are, but what's really interesting is they're building for PRS, which stands for private rental sector. So they are building for pension companies, and pension companies are buying out the blocks because the yields are good for a city centre, and for a city centre of the standard of Leeds, very good. Leeds is an affluent city, but yet the yields are still, attractive. So there are developments going on, but very, very little is coming to the market for residential purposes. So that the pent-up demand is actually continuing. Now, when we're sourcing an RMP, I have been banging the drum for Leeds for years. I've been trying to find a project to get stuck into. And the problem we've had is they're just not building it. It's not there. So we're trying to get in early, maybe do a deal off plan, and then they sell the rest on to residential. Not happening because they're going straight to pension companies. They're bypassing individual investors and they're bypassing owner-occupiers. Now, you may have feelings on that, but that's what's happening. But because that's happening, there's still real opportunity. So Leeds remains on our hit list, and hope we have a bit more luck this year trying to find deals there. Now, next on our list, number 4, is Sheffield. Sheffield is cheap. Let's just start there. Of all the areas we're mentioning today, Sheffield is the cheapest. Prices are furthest behind when you look at the property cycle. This is the area that's least mature in our thinking. So of all the areas we're mentioning today, this is the one where you need to be bravest because prices are low and they haven't really started moving yet. Now, it's possible that we are so early that 2019 you won't see significant growth again. But that's okay for the people who can see the fundamentals there because it's got great universities, great transport links, great population. Employment prospects there are improving all the time with more major employers coming to the area. So 2019 might not be the year that Sheffield goes boom, but 2019 is certainly the year that the clever money gets in.
Yes, and that effect that we've talked about before of people wanting increasingly to live in the city centre is starting to take effect as well. And there's lots of regeneration going on. The centre has already improved dramatically from what it used to be, but there's a lot more going on. There's 480 million being spent on one shopping centre and the surrounding area. There are 2 hotels being developed. HSBC is opening new offices. Clearly, there's a lot happening. And yet prices in the centre, residential prices, are still extremely low. As Rob said, this isn't an area to go into looking to bank big gains in the next couple of years, but it's a place to get in at a nice low base. You'll watch the prices creeping up, and as more people start to catch on later in the cycle, that growth will speed up and you'll end up doing very well indeed.
Now, number 5 is a bit of a biggie, because Rob and I have dined out on our Manchester prediction for a while, but it's time to come up with something new, something early again, and we believe number 5 is that. Number 5 is Nottingham. And we believe this is the next area of the country that is really going to kick off. And there's loads of reasons why.
There are, and I've had to check myself a little bit in case I've got a bit of bias coming through on Nottingham, because I used to live there and I loved it and I've invested there for a long time as well. So am I just hoping that it's going to be one to watch? I think there really is a super strong investment case. The funny thing about Nottingham is that in the last boom, when in most cities construction was going crazy and there were new schemes flying up all over the place, there wasn't that much. Yes, there was some development in Nottingham, but not absolutely tons. So there wasn't a big increase in supply then. And there also hasn't been a big increase over the last decade or so. If you walk around the city centre, in contrast to Manchester, if you look up, you'll see not much because it's all pretty low rise. There have been new developments there, but they're mostly conversions, really nicely done, but pretty small. So there's not been much in the way of new supply. But demand is just growing and growing. There are the 2 universities there, which is the thing that most people know about. And yes, that does bring a lot to the city. But there's also just so much industry in Nottingham. There are so many employers across a whole range of different industries. There are some cities that are known for one particular thing, but Nottingham's got a great mix because it's so well located and it's so well connected for transport. Lots of employers base themselves there. And as a result of that, and the fact that it's a really nice place to live, lots of students end up staying on after they finish university and working for local employers there. That means that every year demand is growing and growing, but supply hasn't been growing enough. But for some reason, prices are just low. You go and look at the price of a really nice 2-bed city centre flat and wonder how it can be that price. It doesn't make any sense to me, and in a few years' time, I refuse to believe it's not going to be significantly higher than where it is now.
The good thing, Rob, is I can have balance, because I've never lived in Nottingham. I've visited, it looks great, but I don't have any emotional attachment to the area. But I do feel a bit emotional about what's happening there, because the amount of wealth and prosperity that Nottingham has, that you mentioned already, it's staggering. It reminds me very much of Leeds. It's a wealthy, affluent city that's doing very well. The transport links are spot on, but the money coming in on top of that as well is really going to shake things up. And one of the reasons why we feel this is the new Manchester of the Midlands and why it's going to do so well is we know what's going to happen, because the developers have woken up to Nottingham as well, and also the local planning committee, because they are allowing developers to finally build, and the land is getting snapped up all around Nottingham right now. Prepare for a construction boom. It's not happened. There aren't even spades in the ground yet. We are getting you in early. But like we've dined out in Manchester, in a couple of years' time, we want to be smug on Nottingham too. So Manchester remains amazing. It's going to do very well. But Nottingham deserves to be ranked very highly as well. And this year, we are going after land and deals and whatever else we can get our hands on in Nottingham. But not content with one area in the Midlands, Rob. We've got another city that really should be here. And it's hard to miss because there's a lot of people there and a lot is going on. It's Birmingham.
Yes, Birmingham, an area that we've been accused of ignoring in the past on the podcast. We've had a few messages from people saying, why do you never talk about Birmingham? Have you got something against it? And no, we don't at all. I guess the reason we've never really talked about it much is it just seems pretty obvious. When we started talking about Manchester, not many people were, and it was still seen as being a bit of a strange view to hold. But Birmingham was already seen as a second city. It's obviously very well connected. There's obviously a lot going on there. But that investment case is just getting stronger. When you come out of New Street Station at the moment, it's really difficult to actually get anywhere. You're just redirected through this absolute warren of hoardings and diversions and things like that, because there are buildings going up all over the place. The whole city centre seems to be under construction. There are schemes going up all over the place, Prices are rising, the population is rising, and there's HS2 to come. It's already one of the most well-connected cities in the UK, and that's just going to get better. So Birmingham's certainly not one to get in early on. It's a very safe bet, but if you do manage to find some value in Birmingham, then I think it's well worth getting involved.
So that's our list. And you'd be fair if you accused us of being pretty optimistic about 2019 and pretty excited. And we are, because we feel these areas will do really well. But this is in stark contrast to how the media and pretty much everyone else you speak to will feel about the property market in 2019. And we get that, because we feel that most areas around the country won't do as well. The media and sentiment in the UK is really driven by London and the South East, and they're not going to have a good 2019. Only a few weeks into January, I'm feeling more and more pessimistic about the market in London and the South East for the short term. I think it's going to be a tough year for everyone who's involved in those markets. But because of that, and Brexit, it's going to feel very negative. But as we touched on last week, 2019 is that year of opportunity. Because while people switch off, you can switch on. And not just switch on to property in general and make sure you get into good deals, but switch on in the best areas. If you're switched on in 2019, I think you're going to do great. You're going to do absolutely fine medium to long term because you got active in a year when other people went to sleep. But if you get switched on in these areas in 2019, well, my friend, I think you're going to be feeling very smug in a few years' time.
So, if you want to dive deeper into any of these areas, don't forget the Property Hub Forum. There are people in there who invest all over the UK, so they'll be able to give you pointers on particular areas to check out. We've also recorded a course on where we're going to be investing in 2019 because it's such an important subject. We go into more depth on all of these areas. So there's a direct link in the show notes, or you can go to thepropertyhub.net/courses and find it there.
Now it's time for a podcast review. Now remember, we love it when you leave us a review. You know, so many of you have bonkers numbers, more than any other business iTunes podcast. Thank you so much. But like we mentioned last week, we love it when you let us know how you've implemented the information we share. So it may be a tactic, a change of strategy, or maybe it got you started, or maybe you stopped and went on to do loads more. Whatever you do, whatever you've done, please let us know through iTunes reviews. It's the best way of saying thanks. We love thank yous, but thank yous with action, wow, they're the cherry on the cake. This week, a review comes in from DIY Ken, and he says, I am a senior manager at a large multinational, and I'm just getting into property after having saved up some funds. I really appreciate all of the honest advice that the two Robs offer. There's so much garbage out there. I actually went on one of the big courses. I couldn't believe what rubbish was being talked about. No money down may work for experienced investors, but not for your average rookie. The two Robs offer a well-rounded approach to the field of property investment, and they bring in aspects of economics, politics, and project management. These guys are the real deal, and I hope they go on to become extremely wealthy. Oh, thank you, DIY Ken. That's very nice of you. But the good news is, even if we do, we enjoy podcasting, so we'll carry on.
Well, we've packed a lot into this episode, but we've still got time for that little bit extra. Hub Extra, in fact, where before the end of every episode, we give you a tool, a tip, a resource, a quote, something for you to think about or something for you to use. And then we back it up with the Hub Extra email that will hit your inbox every Friday morning if you're a Property Hub member. This week, Rob, one that you found, and this is a Chrome extension called Jot.
Yes, the timing for this, I think, is quite apt. January, people are focused, they're motivated, and you've probably got goals or a to-do list that you need to action. Now, I work from my calendar, and that's how I organise myself. But sometimes, when I'm just on the go, a little to-do will float into my life, or a thought that I want to action later, or a goal, perhaps. Now, pen and paper is great, and I am a big fan of that, but sometimes you may not have them to hand. But if I'm on my computer, Jot can come to the rescue. Now, Jot is fantastic. What this extension does is replaces your new tab page for note-taking. So when you open a new tab in Chrome, Jot will appear as the home page. And within there, you can jot down, see what they've done, your notes, your goals, whatever you want. So they're always front and center until you mark them done. So whenever you then go on to open new tabs in the future, you have your list front and center. For long-time listeners, you may remember a similar extension that we've mentioned previously, which is Momentum, which is also great. But the reason why I've switched to Jot is Momentum buries the to-do list in a corner, where Jot takes over your screen pretty much with a to-do list. So it's in your face. Come on, you said you were going to do this, or you wanted to do this, or you wanted to remember this. So I've moved to Jot. It's free, like Momentum. Maybe check out both. This is a new concept to you. Momentum and Jot. We'll pop both in the show notes this week, but currently I'm using Jot and I'm really seeing a lot of benefit from it.
So that is us done for today. Hope that's given you lots of ideas and lots of places to go and explore. Let us know where you're going to be investing this year and what areas have caught your attention. You can catch us on the socials. We're on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as Property Hub UK. And if you want to know what we get up to away from the podcast, well, a couple of things. First of all, if you haven't been to one of our discovery webinars yet, then go to thepropertyhub.net/discover. Get yourself registered for one of those. It's free. But also, like Rob said earlier, do not miss the Property Podcast in 2 weeks' time, where something very exciting is coming. For now, though, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.